Yeah, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy Inside 11, and right now, man, let's get into recognizing constructive and destructive patterns and shit like that. Because a lot of the times your mind can be psychologically conditioned in a particular way where you resonate with certain things on a subconscious, unconscious level, where you can exhibit and play out behaviors that could potentially not constructive, more destructive, kind of like self-defeating and shit like that, depending on whatever these behaviors that you've been psychologically conditioned to play out and shit like that. So being able to sit back, observe, and reflect on what we have created with our mind and shit like that, as far as what thoughts and feelings that we housed for that particular situation and shit, whatever we've accumulated or been psychologically conditioned under to play out, we have to be able to sit back and reflect upon that situation we created, or just look at what we're holding on to as psychological conditioning and shit like that. That's making us create a life like that, because it's like we don't perceive reality as it is. We always perceive reality as we're psychologically conditioned, as we are. You know what I'm saying? And shit like that. So it's like, let me ask you this before we even go in, right? Would a dog that experienced a lot of situations or circumstances of being damaged and shit like that perceive its experience differently from a dog that was raised in an environment where it was provided care that needed for? Of course not. Both of these beings are going to look at their life circumstances from a complete different space. But it's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. It's not about what the cards that life handed you and shit like that. It's about how you manage those cards. Because you see people all the time in society fulfilling an ideal life that come from all different backgrounds. You talk about Buddha, you talk about whoever the fuck your ideal figure that you look up to and shit like that. The point is that these things really just come from us and shit like that as a starting point, not some shit like outside of us and shit, right? But yeah, it's like there's so many other examples that you could talk about. Some people, let's say in the religious community too, are like psychologically conditioned to look for a savior outside of them and shit like that. So therefore, not actually taking care of or handling their life situation. So it's like they just sit back and they pray for an external influence or source to kind of modify or reconfigure whatever it is that they can't take care of and shit like that, right? So that's like a pattern that is actually destructive in nature, that is messing up your life, or messing up the potential that you can play out in your life, versus a pattern that's actually constructive in nature, that comes from truth and not from a basis of ignorance, right? So like I said earlier, based upon my notes, the mind is psychologically conditioned and wired to produce a state of being and, particular behaviors and shit like that correlate with what it has been conditioned and programmed to perceive, right? So it's like, regardless of the experiences and the life situations that you experience, you owe it to yourself basically to be balanced and not to be polarized on both extremes. Unless the situation calls for that, it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that, because everything transitions, everything travels. The sun transitions to create how the effects of different seasons and blah, 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 if you want to look at it that way. But the point is, everything transitions. Even thoughts transition. You can have a thought today, you can have an idea today, that idea is going to die tomorrow. Shit. You might even die today and reincarnate the next day. Like real stuff. So it's like everything is about like transitions and not like holding on to shit. Because nothing is like, you can't really truly hold on to anything. It's like we just experience the qualities of something at a particular time and shit. And shit like that. So it's like, just because someone landed in, let's say, a circumstance or situation that we can perceive to be relatively bad, it doesn't mean that upbringing has to define their life and their future. No, they can actually use the power of their mind, use the power of their observer, use their observation to actually create a better reality, just by understanding that we create our reality, and whatever we're psychologically conditioned to, we're going to perceive externally, outwardly, and we're going to create our reality based upon those reference points. But if we can get rid of the damage and the wounds, and the different forms of complexes or mentalities that can formulate based upon the conditioning of that environment, we can allow ourselves to actually progress beyond what that environment makes of preview or view normally in the seen world, as a possibility to play out. Because like, let's say for example, a poor man may not be expected to make it out of that environment. A rich man may be expected to make it out of that environment because they have all the tools, but those richness can create the conditions for them to overindulge, aka leading to them to kill themselves, right? A lot of celebrities, a lot of rap stars, a lot of people with a lot of money kill themselves, and even poor people kill themselves and shit like that. But it's about how you approach life. It's about how you do it. It's not about what. It's how you do this shit. So ain't nothing truly good or bad and we don't have to get lost in this psychological condition. It's not what happens, it's what we do about what happens and shit like that. It's like that type of shit. That's the point I'm trying to like make with this video, you know? So yeah, it's like we give life to what we pay attention to, aka these mentalities, these mental creatures, these minds, these perceptions and shit like that, that we as a spirit, as an observer, might just live within and look at life through. And that might become our norms to whatever beliefs or whatever things that we've accumulated via our psychological conditioning or whatever mentalities we resonate with based on not knowing what we're doing. So create like a fucked up mind versus a healthy mind, a mind that can be celebrated and shit like that, right? So it's like what we pay attention to, it's like mentalities and shit, and we give life to stuff. A lot of the times we can, like I said earlier, we can reanimate or reintroduce paradigms and patterns of thought and feelings and shit like that into the healthy life that we so claim that we want to pursue and shit like that, right? Because it's like when you're psychologically conditioned to perceive a particular way, and this is no excuses for someone not to be accountable and disciplined by what they're trying to build, by understanding what they're actually experiencing, aka the truth and shit like that. This is by no means a way to escape the rational, logical reality that one needs to actually pursue an ideal life by, like, learning to manage themselves better, right? Just because one is psychologically conditioned, like, in a retarded fucking way, you know what I'm saying? It's not an excuse for that person to behave and play out and live like that, right? Because that can become what do you call it? A form of retardedness, a form of mental illness that can play out for a desire later down the line and shit like that, right? So it's like we make up excuses to stay retarded, right? So it's like that, right? Like where you can play out a destructive pattern in your life, but you can literally sit back and justify why, hey, this destructive pattern, the way that I've been always doing things that has not been yielding me the results that I've been looking for in my life, this is a constructive way to go about it. So it's like you can sit back and really like confuse things and shit like that. And for the people that are not in the usual programs of looking at the world from a truth perspective, there's a lot of programs that are played out in the world on purpose as far as victimization programs and needing shit outside of you programs externally, like, and catering to whatever desire that we got, so we don't necessarily evolve and become more aware and expand our awareness and expand our ability to observe or expand our reality just through staying in that bias and shit like that, right? So the mentality, because the mentality itself that we hold on to is like a self-generating variable, right? So if we hold on to a destructive pattern, that destructive pattern, no matter how we look at it, that mentality is going to be a self-generating variable that's just going to, because we are observing that impulse though, but we're actually not that impulse. But if we don't actually take decisive action to build more constructive patterns, aka create a better mentality, create a mind, so we can actually play out those, that ideal life and shit earnestly and honestly, then it's like we're not taking care of business, we're not standing on business. And then it's like at that point, we're allowing that destructive pattern to spiral and accumulate into, worse outcomes, worse realities, just based upon us not peeping our own game. AKA, that's why I made that previous video yesterday of, studying yourself and being able to observe and reflect and unlearning old patterns to learn new patterns by knowing the pattern of thought that we're involved into that we may not be privy to just based upon us not busy or looking into our subconscious, unconscious reality. People are too busy in the external world, too lost in the external world, scrolling on TikTok or eating fucking McDonald's fried chicken to soothe their feelings or whatever it is that we cater to as a desire, so we can not deal with life. It's AKA, that's why in the movies a lot of the times they present this idea of, at least up in Cineplex, I know they present this coat, I guess, whatever. I forgot what's it called, the company's coat or whatever that comes with their shit. But yeah, they say some shit like, yeah, welcome to your escape and shit like that. Because it's like we truly try to escape reality via the things that we indulge into. But there's nothing wrong with indulging with shit, but it's just about managing that shit so we don't actually get lost in that shit, because we're not that shit. Because if we develop relationships with mentalities, with feelings that are putting us out of whack, creating a destructive life, then it's like we're not being accountable, we're not being disciplined as an observer to actually remove these threats early on, just based upon understanding where things can lead to if we're playing things out negatively in our mind or in our life via destructive habit pattern and shit like that, Real stuff. But yeah, so a mentality is not good or bad. It's just, it's not for either good or bad. It's just you can create a mind that is self-defeating, destructive, non-productive, whatever pattern that you could be auto-generating based upon not having your own destination or your own like mind configured how you want it, or just based upon not understanding that you're truly none of these things. You're truly just nothingness, and when you know you're nothingness, then it's like you know that you're not these thoughts and feelings that you're holding on to, so you can freely and willingly let go of these things and not be under the experience and under the experience or under the hypnotism or under the induction of these past impulses that are coming from past memories and experiences and shit like that, right? Real shit. um yeah, real shit. I got a lot to go on here. I ain't even gonna lie. Yeah. So you can create a mind that is self-defeating, destructive, non-productive by the concepts, perceptions we pay attention to, or you can create a mind that auto-generates a life of balance and shit like that. Because a lot of times, the destructiveness be coming from a life of not having balance and shit like that, right? It's all about choosing your beliefs, aka what we invest our awarenesses into. Because a lot of the times we can invest in our awareness in shit that's not productive, aka being in the consumer market or having the consumer mentality and us not actually producing or being productive and shit like that. Because life is just not about consuming. Life is also about being productive and shit like that. And there's benefits and the advantages on being on either ends and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's like what you invest your awareness because basically the point of this video is like a lot of the times we can invest our awareness, which is really our currency, our current, into past cycles, past thoughts and feelings, past experiences and shit like that can create preconceived notions, perceptions and shit like that. And based upon investing our awareness at this present moment in some past shit that ain't got nothing to do with the moment, we can animate and incarnate that cycle with you know a presence in the moment that really don't got nothing to do with that. Because like the keys that we need to make for our everyday life circumstances and situations have nothing to do with our past, right? Have nothing to do with our past successes, past failures, right? You can use these things as reference points to see, okay, is the pattern that I'm on healthy or not? But these things are not like your reality. These things are just like what you're producing via your mentality. So if you learn to observe, okay, god damn it, why am I exhibiting destructive behavior and what's the mental starting point? What's the roots? You can start to create a fucking better reality. Real shit, rather than investing our awareness into some shit that's actually fucking up our reality. But us just simply resonating with it can raise these things into awareness, raise these things into our conscious mind. That's why a lot of people make the mistake of dealing with the conscious mind and not dealing with the subconscious, unconscious world. Because, when you understand like most things happen, most communication, most information is you're privy to is actually on like a subconscious, unconscious level. So it's like there's a whole world that you're kind of like wired out of. You got to get back in within yourself and really look at those wirings. Where if you study astrology and shit like that, you can look at these things as alignments and shit like that. Because I look at alignments like the same way I guess science explains the idea of neural structures and shit like that. Our alignments are kind of like how we're wired as far as our energies, and it's not necessarily us having a particular zodiac sign or having, like I said earlier, particular cards in life. It's truly just about how we manage these things that allow us come on top versus the person that lacks the management skills or lacks whatever it is that they need as a quality to rectify a situation that's happening in their life or an aspect that they may be missing and shit like that, so they can actually go further with whatever it is that they're trying to do, and hopefully not go further with a destructive pattern. Hopefully go further with like some constructive shit and shit like that, right? So it's like this is gonna be just some differences between destructive and like destructive and constructive patterns, right? Destructive patterns tend to be more emotional and shit like that, aka living from a chaotic space, seeking comfort and what's familiar, which is animalistic in nature because like we're not seeking to expand. And this is where you can get the allegory of, in religion or just religious text in general about, having wings and, the number three, you're having the element of the air, the ability to have logic, thinking, and analyzing, Mercury and shit like that, right? So you can actually not be attached to these emotions that are actually keeping you, because when you understand what emotions is, because emotions come and go, right? But if we live a life that is predicated on emotions, then it's like we're not settled internally, so we're not going to be settled externally. You know what I'm saying? Where it can become like the uncomfortable cancer, where it's like if you know a cancer in your life, cancers can sometimes exhibit this behavior from this quality internally where it's like they create uncomfort for you so they can be comfortable because inside they have this feeling of uncomfort that can be the behavior they exhibit based upon that quality and shit like that, right? So it's like if you just calm, if you take care of yourself, if you actually like, you know, do what you need to do to remove these destructive patterns and shit like that, you'll be in a way better space versus people that don't get into the subconscious, unconscious underlying motivations of their behaviors that they're exhibiting. You'll actually be able to be in a way better space and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Because people don't actually deal with truth. People deal with biases and lies and shit like that. And that can be like very destructive for your life because now you're looking at life from this lens of a bias where you're not accepting the truth, right? And not accepting the truth can be dangerous because it can lead to the most destructive, catastrophic moments and shit like that. Where it's like that becomes, you know, the waking call. You don't want that to be your waking call. You want to be able to, you know, see these things ahead of time so we can, you know, be able to get out of these things earlier and not create these fucked up ass outcomes. You know, that's about also being able to handle those fucked up and shit. You know, but yeah. So basically, so it's talking about destructive patterns, right? So we're talking about it being an animalistic nature because it has to do with, you know, a survival program. Like think about it. If you're always fucking going to the grocery store and buying cake and eating cake, that's some survival shit. Even though you're overindulging into it, that's not like a godly quality. Where think about it, on the 7 deadly sins, that's like lust or like, oh, not lust, that's some sexual shit. Gluttony and shit like that, where you're overly indulging into overly eating some shit. That's not probably not even actually healthy for you whatsoever. And it's like, and it's not even about it not being healthy for you. You can indulge into shit, but like I said earlier, don't overly indulge into it to the point that that form of comfort can become the same thing that actually killed you. You know what I'm saying? Just based on like mismanaging and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's all about understanding and not going too far to actually play out these animalistic awarenesses, right? Like gluttony, anger, wrath, and lust, and all these different things, right? All these things are just lower animalistic lights if you would if you wanted to look at it from the like you know, I guess the scale of awareness or the scale of lights that we can exhibit or play out as far as mentalities and shit like that, that'd be like lower on that scale. That wouldn't be higher. Like enlightenment would be some. I didn't want to say higher and shit like that, but it's just that when you're going in and out of forms, there's be some shit I have to explain to another video because now I'm talking about like spiritual shit rather than psychological shit. It's just that when you're going in and out of shit to expand your awareness, you're becoming more aware of reality. So it's not like that. It's like spirituality get deep because it's like we get lost in like just stupid shit, stupid logic. But yeah, that's not what this video is about, you know, right? So yeah, it's like you don't want to exhibit your destructive patterns can exhibit qualities of just animalistic natures, which you can look at out through the filtering system or the lens of the 7 deadly sins, like being angry all the time, being lustful all the time, being hateful, because like these are just their energies that we can be possessed by and shit like that. But it's up to us to understand that we are nothing and we just use these lights, we use these energies to, you know, create technologies like the body, the mind, and shit like that. And we gotta like understand the game on a deep subconscious, unconscious level so we don't be underneath the influence of these spectrums and these influences and shit like that. So at this point now we're using the light, now we're using awareness, now we're using this shit for our fucking advantage and not being no fucking a jerk off and shit like that, you know, a scumbag and shit, esoteric scumbag. Because it's like an esoteric scumbag is like someone who know they have access to this shit. Like we all have access to everything, right? But an esoteric scumbag would sit back and be like, nah, I don't got access to this shit, based upon them believing or creating a belief that is destructive in nature, by the way, that says like, I'm not capable of doing this. I don't know how to do this. Nah, I can't do this. Nah, let me do this thing. Let me do this shit this way so I can skip that process and shit, you know, of the real work and shit that got to be put in and shit. So it gets really fucking fascinating and really fucking interesting, right? When you actually sit back, think, and analyze this shit as far as, you know, some shit that we all do subconsciously and consciously that we really don't be thinking about. Instead of being on that animalistic demon time and shit, you want to play out angelic natures. You want to actually be logical, be practical. And here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with chaos, but too much of anything is like bad, right? I look at chaos like the transitions in the seasons that introduce a little bit of chaos just for that change, for that time of the day or that time of the year, that season that we're experiencing, whether it's summer, spring. That's like good chaos because it's like you're like transitioning into shit, you know? But too much chaos to the point that you can't keep fucking track of shit. That's like bad. That's like. But here's the thing: that could be like a psychological conditioning that you're under that you play out, and it could get worse, and it could get bad, and you can get really wire it into other shit, and it get weird, bro. Real stuff. Where it's like that's not having balance. That's not having equilibrium. Real shit. Where it's like, you know what's actually crazy? I'm gonna tell you guys after this, right? After constructive patterns. I just got a sick ass thought. Constructive patterns is more of a logical, practical, aka left brain, more angelic, getting out of our feelings and shit like that. It's like the left brain's ability to give structure, shape, and form out of our emotions, so we can actually create a transition, because we can make sense out of our negative emotions or our lower animalistic natures and choose to make these things logical, aka lighter in nature, because now we're transmuting water into air and shit like that. An element that's more movable in the mind and shit like that, right? Um, that you make something logical that is destructive in nature and shit like that, right? So what I was gonna add earlier, right, was that it's okay to have destructive behavior, it's okay to have constructive behavior, but it's like you have to direct those qualities in a way where you're actually deconstructing your life and constructing your life in a harmonious manner. You're not creating chaos just for the sake of not having yourself together, mismanaging yourself, but you're actually experiencing chaos or allowing the natural form of chaos to occur, in a way that actually supports your life. Like I said earlier, when we go like from moment to moment in our life, right? That's like, what do you call it? That's like a natural form of chaos that we just have to undergo. Like we're sleeping one day and we get the fuck up, we wake up, you're real shit. So it's like that's like a transition, a natural form of chaos that we want to like welcome and shit like that. And if we can live on that basis of being just in the now and not in some past shit, we can actually have some constructive chaos where we're actually like constructing reality and just in a way that actually is harmonious. Like where we're taking this disharmony and harmony and we're merging those qualities into one to create what? Equilibrium, fucking balance and shit like that, right? So, but when you're too stuck into one of these things on a percentage level, like being too stuck into like destructive behaviors, you're being too chaotic, you're just fucking up your life. You're being too constructive, too logical. You're living your life based upon rules, words. You could be so anally retentive about time, just logical shit and practical stuff to the point that like your whole life you don't let yourself be inspired by a new vision or to or to feel good about some shit. You gotta be able to switch and jump in between this shit and shit like that, right? The whole shit idea of like logic and order, even, right? So constructive patterns, on a more, if you're coming from a background of being more chaotic and destructive in nature, you gotta learn to, and basically demonic, animalistic, you gotta learn to have some goddamn it constructive patterns that are more logical and practical. God fucking damn it, so you can build more of an equilibrium life, right? So moving on, we can use the mind for animalistic, low vibrational patterns as a vehicle to animate that mentality, right? Because all the mind is a vehicle that we use to animate reality, aka our mentality and shit like that. Or we can learn to correlate ourselves with our, with our angelic higher self and actually create a life purpose, aka like, what am I living this life for, and what am I giving my awareness, time, and attention to? Am I giving it to shit that's outside of me that I'm catering to distract myself from the shit inside of me, or am I actually creating a life where I'm dealing with the shit inside of me so I can actually be constructively, adding value to people around me and to myself, most importantly, and shit like that. So you can just be a fucking constructive person, a productive person, not a fucking non-productive person and shit. Real stuff. And so it's like if we're observing our behavior that's auto-suggested by our subconscious, then in the long term, we are able to adjust ourselves out of those patterns of behavior by observing our mind and what it resonates with. And if it is a concept that doesn't lead to expansion, then it's a limiting pattern of thought, aka behavior, that we need to learn to navigate out of, aka a destructive behavior that's not serving our highest possible good or the ideal fulfilled life that we perceive ourselves within, right? So with that being said though, right, we can be aware of a position we want to be into, but that position, we can get there in so many different ways, but we might just want to do it in the way that society thought us, right? So I'd say like have a goal, but at the same time, they'll understand like there's so many different ways to get to that goal. And it's like you gotta have a certain level of constructive thinking, logic, and practicality. You know, not just being chaotic, trying to transform shit chaotically around you and reality around you, right? But actually has a form of constructive pattern and shit like that, so you can be more logical and practical and shit like that, right? Yeah, this video's been going for a while. I ain't gonna lie, but we're gonna wrap this shit up. So it's like, one question to ask yourself, right? To just summarize all this shit, right? Is if that thought pattern, belief, perception, preconceived notion, conditioning leads to a negative life, right? No matter what it is, and not our ideal, fulfilled, positive, or I don't want to say positive or negative because I really want to say balance. But let's say if that belief, perception, preconceived notion, conditioning is making us live a negative, non-fulfilled life and not our ideal fulfilled life, then it's a mental conditioning or a condition that we need to learn to unlearn so we can actually have our awareness available for what is for us and go forward on it and shit like that, right? Because a lot of the times our mind, our awareness can be occupied with some shit that's not actually in our advantage or actually is constructive. It's actually fucking destructive and shit like that, right? So if we learn to just re-navigate our mind and really just understand that, okay, I can be really familiar with some shit, but at the same time though, I have the ability to become non-biased as an observer and really balanced just by not catering to that. And you can jump into some whole new type of shit, jump into some whole new type of life just based upon not catering to that comfortability, not catering to that, god damn it, overindulgence or whatever it is that we do to keep ourselves from goddamn it expansion. And that can play out as just ignorance as well. Ignorance is a trait that you can exhibit based upon just ignoring certain shit that you might need to grow out of so you can actually expand more and shit like that. Facts. But yeah, with that being said, this was I guess some analyzing and some shit like that by recognizing our constructive and destructive patterns and studying ourselves more. Because when you study yourself, then you know yourself. Then hey, you know the shit that you need to really work on to actually really grow and expand. Unless you want to keep playing out the behaviors, the reality that you've always been playing out. If you want to create a new reality, you got to move on to a new mentality, and that newness sometimes may look like nothingness, and that might have to be another whole other video. But it is just a video for the people that are really in that space of being psychologically conditioned, and they just needed the information to start to look at their situation like, oh, okay, I may be familiar with this psychological conditioning, and I may really believe that, hey, this is my reality. But slowly and surely, you start to learn that, hey, you can outgrow these patterns of behavior if you really actually just invest your awareness in a way that actually allows you to outgrow this shit rather than spiral down into more destructive patterns based upon not dealing with the root of the problem that we've been dealing with in our lives. With that being said, peace out, everybody. Take care. I'm gonna see you tomorrow and shit like that, right? Peace.